Howdy, folks, and welcome to the little pocket of the internet devoted to creative photography. In this week's photography tutorial, we'll be experimenting with backlighting wine glasses to see what interesting artistic images we can achieve. So first of all, you're going to need a set of wine glasses. Make sure you give them a good rinse and wipe if they've been sitting in a cupboard for a while like mine have, and be careful handling them afterwards to avoid leaving fingerprints. Then you'll need a dark space to shoot in to avoid getting reflections on the glass. As always, I shot in my garage, but I did leave the room lights on without any trouble. Naturally, you'll need something to put your glasses on. I grabbed my little desk on wheels that I bought from a charity shop specifically for photo shoots and set this up with a clean mirror on top so I could capture reflections of the glasses and light. But the mirror is optional if you don't have a small portable one handy, though a sheet of picture frame glass may be worth trying too. I then popped my camera on a tripod purely to make aligning the glasses a little bit easier, but you don't have to. The hardest, most time-consuming part of this project was getting the lighting right, as I've not used a modifier as a backlight before. But in this case, I wanted to try it so that the light would wrap around the sides of the glass. But if what I'm about to talk about seems too involved, I will be covering some easier alternatives later on. You can do this with any kind of studio lighting, including speed lights, but it was easier for me to use my Godox 8200, which I put into a square 32-inch softbox positioned directly behind the glasses to act as a backdrop. But unfortunately, the diffusion cover was a bit crumpled and stained, and I didn't like how distracting it was. Instead, I decided to try changing the modifier by swapping to my 47-inch umbrella softbox. I positioned the light shooting into the back of the umbrella away from the glasses, but this left a dark patch in the middle. So I tried swapping the direction of the light to face the glasses, but this created a super bright patch that made this option unusable. Then I remembered I have a new beauty dish I haven't yet tried, and figured the diffusion plate inside might spread the light more. But of course, the plate still left a dark patch in the middle. So what to try next? I figured I needed to diffuse the light more. So I went looking for my 5-in-1 reflector, knowing it had a translucent diffusion panel that might help. And it did. So I clipped this to the ring of my beauty dish using a peg. The other problem I was having is that I couldn't get the light stand low enough to put any distance between the light and the glasses. So I had to bring it as close as I could to the table, which meant the light wasn't as controllable as I would have liked. And it unfortunately meant I also had a curl of light on the edges. You may not have this problem, so by just putting distance between your diffuser and light, you will be able to spread the light more. But I didn't have this option, and so even with the diffuser there was still a dark patch in the center. But by raising the light's power, I was able to mostly disguise this. The other thing that helped to shield the problem was to put some liquid into the back glass. I used red cordial only because I didn't have any red wine, but you could also use grape or cranberry juice too. Now, this all might sound like a lot of work, but honestly, once I got the lighting right, the rest of the shoot was really easy. And you have other options for lighting, like using a white backdrop with 2 lights pointed at it from 45 degrees either side, or even easier options that I'll cover shortly. So to actually begin the shoot, I started by positioning my glasses in a line, and I shot variations both with and without the wine. You will want to make sure the glasses are perfectly aligned, or it's going to throw your viewer's eye off. I did this by just taking a test shot, reviewing it, and then very carefully nudging each glass into position. The settings I used were f11, 1/200th of a second, and ISO 100, and my light power was around a quarter, so it was only just overexposing the background, which is pretty much what you want for high-key lighting. You'll also really need to think about focus with this arrangement. In many cases, I focused on the front glass, which was the easiest for the camera to lock onto. But when the back glass had wine in it, this really drew the eye, so I wish I had swapped focus to the back glass in those circumstances. Using a narrower aperture or even focus stacking will also help. I also experimented with both a 24-70 and a 70-200, but it really didn't make a noticeable difference. For these shots, I really love how the back wine glass looks when refracted in the stem. Next, I wanted to experiment with some colored gels by putting a gel over my light inside of the modifier, but the color looked too washed out for my liking. For these, I raised the ISO to 500 to account for the loss of light. So instead, I went back to white light and played with different glass arrangements, camera orientations, and variations with and without the cordial. The eyes that appeared in these shots are quite interesting, but it makes some of them hard to look at because then our eyes start searching for faces. For example, I can't help but see a capybara when I look at this one. Then I wanted to try a black background with just a kiss of light on the side of the wine glasses. I used the exact same setup for these, except I cut a piece of black cardboard into a long strip and then attached it to the diffusion panel using another peg. This made such a difference, and I just love how the light lit up the red wine only at the sides. Again, I tried many variations with this setup, and it's really hard to pick a favorite. The settings for these weren't much different at f9, 1/200th of a second, and ISO 100. Now, for those of you who don't have a range of lighting modifiers, I wanted to see what I could create with minimal gear. So for this version, I used nothing more than my light and my reflector's diffusion panel. This created a cross-shaped light, which I think looks quite interesting with the way that it's refracted in the wine glass. But you can prevent this by moving the diffusion panel as far away as possible from the light. I experimented quite a bit with the position of the diffusion panel to varying degrees of success, using the same camera settings as before, though I may have varied the light power as needed. By this time, with all the glass handling, I started to see visible fingerprints in my shots that I needed to edit out in post. So remember to give yours a wipe regularly throughout your experimenting. Finally, I decided to try something different altogether. I jumped on my computer and used Canva to create an empty white document that I made full screen to act as a background. I then placed a thick book over my keyboard with the mirror on top to lift it above the black bar under my screen, and carefully put the glasses on top. This actually worked great and may even be my favorite from my experiments, so everyone has options for trying this technique. My settings for this were f7.1, 0.3 of a second, and ISO 250. Obviously, you'll need a tripod to account for the longer shutter speed. Now, your images are probably going to look quite different from mine based on the shape of your glasses, how many you use, what your lighting setup is, and your choice of lens. And that is a good thing because we all want to create shots that are uniquely our own. Lastly, you may wish to polish your images in editing by removing the seam of the mirror. I don't find this too distracting, but I still wanted some cleaner options. So let me quickly show you how to do this in Photoshop. So I'm going to use this image to show you how to get rid of these seams. So the first thing we'll need to do, obviously, is open it in Photoshop. So we'll go to Photo, Edit In, and then Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Now let's first edit out any distractions. So there's a little spot here, and by this time the liquid had sort of left a little bit of a rim around the glass, and because it was cordial, it was a little bit sticky. So let's just remove those first. So first I'll just add a new layer using my new layer button here, and then I'm going to zoom in. And I will start with my spot healing brush. So it's the one on your toolbar that looks like a band-aid. I'm going to hold that down and choose the first one. The shortcut is J. And then making sure that new layer is highlighted, all I can do is just draw over the bits that I want to remove, and Photoshop will do a really good job. Now you can also do this in Lightroom, and for some of my images I just stuck to Lightroom, But Photoshop is just a bit more forgiving and it lets you get in a lot closer to the edges. So that's why I prefer it. Now this one was a little bit harder. So instead of using the spot healing brush tool, I'll show you what happens when we do. I can just click on that, but then it doesn't kind of carry on with the seam that's there. So instead, I'm going to swap to my healing brush tool by holding down the little Band-Aid icon and choosing healing brush. I'm going to make it smaller. Then I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and sample an area that's similar. And then I'm going to hold it over the area that I want to paint over in the position that I want it to align with. So I want that line to line up, and then I can just paint that away. See, that looks pretty good. Not perfect, but no one is going to tell. There's a few little more here, but I don't want to spend too long on this. So maybe we'll just move on to the next step. So we might just take a look at the drops, and I'm just changing to my zoom tool to zoom in with the shortcut Z. And then I think I will try my spot healing brush again and just paint over these areas. Now, for some reason, it doesn't tend to work so well in this section. Sometimes it does. And I think that's because it's trying to sample from similar sections. So instead, what I might do is use my healing brush tool again. In that case, I'm going to tell it where to sample from, so it's not choosing on its own. And then I can just paint over problem areas. I'm just sampling often so that the colors and light will match up. And so I would just work around the image, just fixing little areas like this and this. So it will take a little bit of time, but it will be worth it in the end. But again, I think that's enough to show you what to do. So we'll just move on. Now, the biggest thing that we'll probably want to work on is our seam. So I will just switch to my zoom tool again and zoom in. I'm going to make a new layer now. And again, I might try my healing brush tools, which is already loaded. Now, the difficulty here is that this is a different color to this. So that means that sampling could cause an issue. So let's just have a little look. It's not too bad. Now, with the edge here, it tends to get a bit confused when you have edges. So what I might actually do is take a sample of the glass and move that down and then paint that bit away. That works good. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger because now the problem starts to get a little larger. And let's try that. Now, that's not too bad. Let me fix this little section while we're here. And you could probably get away with that or do a bit more work with it. Now, something I tried during my little experiment that worked really well is to add another new layer, and that was to load the mixer brush tool. So the mixer brush is found under your regular brush. You just hold it down and choose this bottom one, mixer brush tool. And what it does is it lets you kind of blend colors together. So if I take a sample from here and then just start roughly kind of drawing around over everything, really roughly painting there, it just mixes all those colors together. So it's good for blending areas that have a little bit of a gradient change. So I could spend a bit more time in this. I think it's just made it a little bit smudgy. But by painting more of this white, I can probably just blend things together a bit better. So that's how that's looking. And it has pretty much completely removed the problem. So you could now work on this side. You will also potentially want to work on the lines inside the glasses, but they are a little bit harder because they're closer and because there is quite a color change. But it really just depends on how perfect you want your image. If you wanted to enter it into a competition or something like that, then you probably would do that work. But if it's just for socials, you probably wouldn't worry too much. So those are the basic changes I made to these images in Photoshop. Time for a drink, I think. Thanks for watching, and all the best with photographing your own glassware creations. If you're inspired by what you've learnt today, be sure to subscribe for lots more creative experiments. And if you're as addicted to creative photography as I am, maybe you'd love to come and play inside my course, Photo Fanatics. Until we meet again, happy creating.